I'm not sure there's any good reason to try to persuade them.
You are slippery. But you should admit that whether there's a reason for it or not, it should be possible.
Well, if I knew more about the details, I might think there was something I could say. But given no more of the story, I'm not sure that there's anything that I ought to say.
Well, I'm assuming that by all the other tests you can apply, the meanings they attach to all the non-logical words are just, I mean, we can translate without trouble.
Yes, well, that's the trouble. We're assuming a lot because I want to connect the things they say with things I would say, perhaps in rather complicated ways, but in a way that makes what's going on intelligible to me. But the trouble is, it becomes more and more intelligible the better a mapping I can find between what they say and what I say. And to the extent that that fails, to that extent, it's hard to know how to bring my thoughts to bear on theirs, because there's a misfit by supposition.
There's a misfit, but you think, if I understand you, that the only intelligible logical constants are the ones we have, and that those are ones that conform to classical logic, essentially.
Well, that wouldn't be how I would put it.
Okay. Then please put it.
Well, intelligibility to me means finding a rational pattern there, and of course that has to mean for me as an interpreter what I find rational, what I can make sense of. It's not that I insist that other people use exactly the connectives I do. It's rather a matter of my being able to discover, given the conceptual apparatus at my disposal, a way of making contact with their thought in a way that keeps track both of their inferences, that is, makes them rational as far as I can see, and of course also connects their thought with their behavior and with the world. Now, to the extent that I can do that, I've managed to use my apparatus to capture as much as I can of what's going on there. That doesn't mean that there's something special about my apparatus, except that it's all I've got. And rationality for me means finding that sentences can go from one to another in very basic situations, but still, let's say, inferring the instances from a generalization and little things like that. And
of course they do that.
Oh, they do that. Yes. Well, good. Now, so far, so good. Now, how much sense I can make out of the exact situation you're setting me, I don't know. But my guess is that I could probably make perfect sense of it within my own apparatus.
Well, I don't think you could translate it, but you could certainly make sense of it to the following degree. I mean, look, you have a class of students who can teach them intuitionistic logic, and at first it's rather strange, but when they get used to it, they get used to reasoning in accordance with these rules, and they know what would not be a valid inference. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is the opposite of Brouwer, as it were. They may not be convinced by the background which is given in explanation of why only these rules are valid, and essentially the background is that that there isn't the gap between having reasons and being true that we talked about earlier, but that the only notion of truth is there being reasons, not of course necessarily that I know them, but that's the background. They may not accept that, but at least they can see what it's like to think that way and to reason in accordance with that. And as it seems to me, if you want to persuade them that they needn't, they were students to start with, but now they're people from this island. If you want to persuade them that there's no need to confine themselves to these forms of argument, you've got to get rid of that background, metaphysical, I don't know what to call it, belief, right? And that's, so I'm really getting back to what we discussed right at the beginning, this gap. How do we get across this gap from there being reasons available to us, or available to being true, independently of any reasons? And that's what I think you've got to get across to these people if they're to reason the way you would like, you think it's right to reason.
Well, but I'm not so far convinced that there's anything wrong with what they do. It's different. And I can only say that to the extent that I understand what they're up to. And you may not call that translation, and I'm happy not to, but it's interpretation. I mean, if I can understand what they're up to, then I can interpret that. And in that case, my standards of rationality, my most basic standards of how propositions are related to each other, I can apply to them. I see how things are going here, so I can fit this in, not necessarily piece by piece, but in a very general way. I see no difficulty about this. In fact, it's a little like learning physics. You can't learn it piece by piece. You've just got to learn the whole theory before you see what any of the terms really mean and how to operate in it. It's like catching on to something else. But of course, your basic idea of how propositions are related to each other hasn't changed.
I would be perfectly happy to leave Donald the last word with that. Well, it's not that I think we're totally in accord, but I think it would be appropriate to stop at that point.
Well, I mean, I hope you captured that last remark.
How was it running?
I mean, it's an essential footnote to our discussions.
Right.